Now for our final story of the evening. Tough new powers to seize passports from those suspected of travelling to Syria or Iraq will come into force within 24 hours as the Counter-Terrorism and Security Bill receives Royal Assent. Other provisions in the bill are still awaiting parliamentary scrutiny. Reporter Yasmin Khatun has been following the story.
Individual liberties and freedom from surveillance are two key virtues that a new law passing through Parliament has placed under attack. The new piece of legislation, called the Counter-Terrorism and Security Bill, being rushed through Parliament, has major implications for all communities in the UK, but in particular its 1.6 million Muslims. Security is a key issue in the country, and the current threat level from international terrorism in the UK is assessed by MI5 as severe. This is a part of the reasoning used by the government behind the need to further terror laws. In a statement released earlier today, the Home Office said,
"This important legislation will disrupt the ability of people to travel abroad to fight and then return, enhance our ability to monitor and control the actions of those who pose a threat, and combat the underlying ideology that feeds, supports and sanctions terrorism."
But the bill has come under widespread criticism from many who fear the impact it will have on Muslims.
This bill is going to have a terrible effect because it's going to force public sector workers to spy upon Muslims. Right down from nursery school to doctors. It's a cradle-to-grave policy, which, to be honest, echoes the Gestapo spying upon ordinary citizens in all aspects of their life.
On the contrary, I am humbled.
A part of the bill seeks to make reporting on those who can be perceived to be on the pathway to terrorism, be it through action or beliefs, a statutory requirement. Nursery teachers, doctors, nurses and even opticians under this new law will all be under a mandatory duty to inform officers within the Government Prevent programme if they feel one of their students, patients or colleagues is at risk of becoming a terrorist. The Prevent programme has acted out an aggressive strategy to fight radicalisation or extremist opinion here in Britain over the last 10 years. A strategy many argue has failed.
Prevent has been an abject failure because it's based upon a false premise. It creates a link between being more religious with being more violent. And this conveyor belt theory has been undermined time and time again by academics, and it has no basis in empirical evidence. Until they look at the actual root causes of terrorism, they won't be able to create a strategy to stop it.
The presumption of innocence and its value to British society is immeasurable to cohesion. But as debates continue to flare over freedom of speech, are we on the brink of losing the right to hold differing opinions just because the government may disagree with them? Yasmin Khatun, The Report.
Joining me to discuss the Counter-Terrorism and Security Bill is Salman Butt, Chief Editor of Islam 21C, Margaret Gilmore, who's a Senior Research Fellow at the Royal United Service Institute, and on the line, Sunny Hundal, who's a writer and journalist. Welcome to the programme, all of you. Sunny, this is a step way beyond any security measures that we've seen before, because it starts dealing with the question of what people believe rather than what they're doing or planning to do, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I think we have to be very vigilant in saying that this, bill strikes down, has a big impact on free speech in this country. And I think that we have to stand up against that and say we should believe in free speech and the right for people to hold different views. And some of those views might be unpalatable for this government or for other people, but that's the way it goes. And I think one of these problems over here in the bill is to say that people who, hold these some sort of views that they might find offensive are somehow going to lead those people to commit terrorism. I think that's a real problem.
Margaret, I mean, there could be a discussion about whether or not people's passports should be taken away from them. But people might be, willing to countenance that if they thought they were going to fight in Syria and Iraq. But the bits of this legislation that talk about university campuses having to rate on a scale of 1 to 10 whether or not a guest speaker is a danger or not. I mean, this has gone too far, hasn't it?
Well, I think we have to look at the difference between recommendations, guidelines and what's going to be law. But the ultimate question is, how are you going to deal with this problem? How are you going to stop the violence and the terrorist attacks? And the other thing is, what do you say to the parents of some of these young people who are coming to the government saying, why aren't you doing more? Why did you let my 15-year-old go out of the country because she or he had a passport? They shouldn't have been allowed to. They were too young. They were running away from home. So, I think a lot of this is about physical things to try and discourage people who shouldn't really be going, who maybe don't understand what they're going to from going, to tell people when they come back into the country they have to be accountable for what they've been doing, and also a much more universal system right across the UK for people, for prevent and for channel and for dealing with extremists.
Salman, what's your take on all this?
With all due respect to your other guests, I think the point of this bill is not, or this part of the bill is not to stop people necessarily going off to fight ISIS. That would be a very good, going to fight with ISIS, sorry. That would be an aim which nobody disagrees with. The part we disagree with, however, is what is happening is the systematic breakdown of the rule of law and in favouring individual discretion of people at the border instead of due process and the rule of law. Ironically, on the 800th year of the signing of the Magna Carta, what we're seeing and what we're going to see is people who are suspected of going to fight with ISIS being put under these measures, being excluded or having their passports taken away. And why that's an important distinction to what your guest mentioned, of people going to fight and 15-year-olds and these types of examples, is that you have to prove your innocence. If you are accused of, or if you're suspected of going to Turkey or for example, in order to cross the border and fight for ISIS, then you have to prove your innocence. And we are losing one of the most fundamental safeguards of a civil society, and that is the presumption of innocence of the accused, especially accused by the state.
Margaret, what about that? I mean, surely if the authorities have a case against somebody, they should take them to court and prosecute them.
Well, there will be legal redress. I mean, you're not going to just stop anybody and everybody. You're only going to stop if there is a suspicion, just as people arrested if there is suspicion, and then there is due process. So if you get stopped or I get stopped and our passport gets taken away, we can call in a lawyer and we can just start saying what it's all about. And if it was wrongful and we were actually arrested, then we can start taking measures. On the other hand, if it transpires that the parents of somebody or the family have already reported them missing to the police, and you're doing that to them, and they have already shown in what they've been writing on Facebook or on other social media is a desire to go to Syria, then actually you may be helping everybody involved by stopping them going.
Sunny, do you think that possibly what matters more almost than the legislation itself is the political climate in which it's enacted? Because we know, for instance, from the cases of miscarriages of justice in the Irish Troubles, that probably is as important a factor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Margaret is being very disingenuous here. There's been loads of cases where the terrorism bills or even laws passed in the past have been used against other people. I mean, most famously, for example, the police used anti-terrorism legislation to stop people protesting against Chinese embassy, against Chinese people coming to Chinese politicians coming to the UK. So there is too many cases of such laws being used or misused by the police and other agencies. And I think that's why it's very important to be careful before these laws are passed. I mean, for example, she said, what happens if a parent goes to the police and says, why aren't you stopping my kid? It's not the job of the police to do that. It's the job of the parents to take responsibility and find out what their kids are doing and saying, and then say, you're not allowed to go. It should not be the police to stop them. I mean, in some cases, the parents do tell the police and say, my kids escaped, can you find out where they are? And they find out that these people are leaving for Syria or Turkey, and fine, they stop them. But, frankly, I would rather have these people go. If someone wants to join ISIS, go and leave the country. I have no problem with that. But that's a separate academic debate. But I think that, this idea that the police should be confiscating passports or should be stopping people from saying stuff, it's incredibly dangerous to say that we should pass a law against that, because it's going to be used not just for Muslims, but a wide variety of people. And it's heinous in both cases, whether you use it against Muslims or whether you use it against non-Muslims.
I mean, Margaret, do you have no concerns that we might be entering the kind of territory that we were that produced the miscarriages of justice in Irish cases? By which I mean that there's a kind of head of steam built up ideologically, the government and the authorities would move with all their power, and the wrong people end up in jail.
Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely across all of that. I started my career in Northern Ireland in the height of the Troubles, but and you're absolutely right, there were those miscarriages of justice over here in a certain climate, but we're not in that situation at the moment. But I do think the question is, how do you stop it? I think it's very, very important that all the civil liberties groups are very articulate, that they make sure that this government does not overstep the mark and cross a line. But on the other hand, this is a problem. There are more people going each week out to Syria. The numbers are not diminishing. What is to be done about it? You've got to say to people going to Syria and ending up with ISIS, which is where the majority are ending up, is actually taking you to a terrorist training camp, in effect. And the people coming back are a danger in a small number of cases, and we've had the court cases to prove that, are a danger to the security of the UK. And it's all fine until it's your brother, your sister, your friend who gets caught up in some awful attack.
Salman, do you think let's leave for the moment the question of the passports and whatnot, because there's much more to this law than that. Specifically, the requirement of people. And can be a requirement with legal compulsion behind it, to report to the authorities people who are not committing a crime but who they think are thinking the wrong thoughts. I mean, that is a corrosive belief or a corrosive thing to introduce into the social fabric, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, let's just get one thing straight. Nobody is defending people's right to become terrorists here. We all agree that we don't want people to go and commit terrorist atrocities. The point we're trying to make here is that these types of repressive, freedom-grabbing laws and measures, they actually produce the very atmosphere of alienation, of disenfranchisement that would push somebody in order towards thinking those thoughts in the first place. And what you have, therefore, is a separation between certain people who have genuine grievances and the rest of society who think that, they have to spy on each other. They think they have to report something that may even sound slightly, dodgy in terms of beliefs and so forth. I mean, the examples that are given to justify these measures, my son's gone over to Syria to fight with ISIS, or my daughter's gone off and so forth. These are already crimes. You don't need more and more laws to bring people to justice for these issues. The problem is the creation of a suspect community out of just people who are exchanging ideas and thoughts. We've seen this culture of suspicion, how it can completely degrade a civilized society. We saw it happening in Lebanon, in Algeria, in Afghanistan. We see people who, just for personal revenge or whatever reason, they report and accuse their colleagues or their neighbors of being extremists, and then this leads to a whole culture of mistrust and people not really trusting one another.
Well, we'll leave you for a moment to just cat that phone. OK, Margaret, what about this other aspect of it? Because I take your point that these are guidelines that are going to be issued. But when you've got former members of Margaret Thatcher's cabinet standing up in the Lords and saying this stuff about ranking speakers on university campuses, this is out of order. I mean, surely the government has got in the wrong place here.
You show me the part in this bill that talks about spying on your neighbours. You show me the part in this bill that says people aren't allowed to think what they want. Of course, you won't be able to find it because it's not there. This is about trying to identify people before they carry out an attack. It's not only what's happening over in Syria. How do you stop people like the killers of Lee Rigby, who were very vocal, both on the internet and with their friends and their neighbours, about what they believed in, and even about wanting to carry out violent attacks, and they were free and they carried out that attack. So it's identifying people not just for what they're thinking, but identifying people who have a list of factors that, if they are combined, leads to a concern, i.e. extreme radicalisation, not like most Muslims are. And on top of that, an ability to be violent, which you and I and your guest there do not have.
Had Lord Lamont lost the plot then in the Lords when he said that this stuff about universities report? He said, you know, how are we going to rank David Irving? How are we going to rank the French members of the National Front? Had he misunderstood the legislation when he was talking there?
I don't know. I didn't see him. I really can't comment on that.
Okay. Sunny, do you think now that the government will have a pause for thought? There are some indications that while the bill was in the Lords, they had to introduce they said they didn't think it was necessary, but nevertheless they introduced a phrase about academic freedom to kind of counter some of these criticisms. Do you think they're getting to a point where they think they perhaps have gone too far, or are they just going to push ahead?
I don't know. I have a feeling that Theresa May is going to posture a bit more. You know, she's obviously, there's a political element to this because she also wants to run for the leader of the Conservative Party, and I suspect that she wants to look strong for that, and for that reason she might be less willing to do compromises. I think that across civil society we have to raise our voices because this is about free speech, and if we frame it right, if the framing is about free speech and people being arrested for offensive views, then I think that a broader section of society would think this is troubling. I mean, Margaret, for example, was saying, you know, people should make their voices heard. I mean, civil liberties organizations have been saying for years that actually anti-terrorism legislation has been exploited and misused to arrest people wrongly and to stop people from protesting over a whole range of issues, not just Muslim-related or terrorism-related issues. So this is not new, and the danger is that the Conservative Party, which earlier said we don't need new legislation, are now doing this for political reasons. And just one final point, which is that I think the point about free speech is really important here. You know, there have been loads of controversies over recently about free speech, and I think this is why I keep on saying that free speech is really important, because when people, Muslims, for example, say, you know, we should all say things which are respectful of each other, then there is a danger that it looks like they're not standing up for free speech. And it's legislation like this which makes it really important that we all upheld the right of free speech and people to say offensive things to each other, even if they find it uncomfortable. And I think this is why we should frame this as free speech, and we should say that this is going to affect not just Muslims, which it clearly will, but lots of other people who want to say things which others might find offensive. And I think there you'll find a broader range of people who are willing to agree and say this is very dangerous for us. Okay,
Sunny Hundal, Salman Butt, and Margaret Gilmore, thanks very much for that discussion. But I'm afraid that's all we've got time for on this episode of The Report. My thanks to my guests for coming in and to you at home for watching. Don't forget, you can keep up with us on Twitter by following @IslamChannel and using the hashtag The Report. But for now, we'll leave you with some scenes from a candlelit vigil which was held for the 3 Muslim students who were shot dead near the University of North Carolina campus on Tuesday. We'll be back tomorrow, but until then, good night.
Basketball.